Hello, welcome to another episode of Forgotten Cemeteries in the Pacific Northwest. Today we're at Champoeg Cemetery, located in Aurora, Oregon, Marion County. But we'll talk about what happened to the original Champoeg town, as it doesn't exist anymore from what I read. Alternative names to this cemetery, there's quite a bit. Case, Donley, Old Masonic, School District 2, Jurgens, Graveyard, Jurgens William, and Jurgensville Mission. So let's go meet some of the local residents and hear their story. A little history about this cemetery. What a good one we have for the history nerds out there. Cemetery established in June of 1853, so a pretty old cemetery here. There's 100 to 500 burials per the Oregon Burial Site Guide. Find a grave shown 407 memorials so far. The parking lot here is the site of the Jurgenville Church, so that's probably where all those alternative names came from in the beginning. There's also a Cases Creek near here, so that's another alternative name reference, and I believe there's some cases buried here. So, Champoeg. No, it's not a Herbal Essence commercial. It's exactly what you're thinking of. Shampoo plus E-E-E, so Champoeg. It is now a ghost town, but according to our friend FX Mathiot, whose headstone we visited in Butteville Cemetery, the name Champoeg was derived from the French words meaning camp of sand. However, another report said French word champ or field and an Indian word pouge or root were behind the meaning. Ooh. Another said the name isn't French at all, and then they're lying, and it is purely Indian shampoo, a weed. This area, though, was the site of several important meetings back in the 1840s. Champoeg would be the site chosen for a meeting place, but mainly because accessibility was optimal via land and water during that time. May 2nd, 1843, the Americans and British held a meeting to determine if a government should be established in Oregon. We've talked about this before, and the measure barely passed, 52 to 50 in favor. A petition was drafted and sent to the United States Congress and presented by William Gilpin in 1845. And then in 1848, we saw the Oregon Territory established and born. Continuing on with the history of Champoeg, sadly Champoeg was not chosen as a capital for some reason. The Oregon Territory would last from 1848 until 1859, when Oregon was admitted into the Union as a state. However, Champoeg wouldn't have the same luck. December 2nd, 1861, the Willamette River would rise 55 feet, flooding the entire town. This would be part of the big historical event, the Great Flood of 1861, where snow and rain continued on for weeks, November of 1861, and lasted until January of 1862 in high elevations in Oregon. I guess even the oldest Native Americans couldn't recall a flooding event this bad in history. They were even taken back by it. The flooding destroyed Champoeg, and it was never rebuilt. Residents fled to a house on a hill named the Robert Newell House, which was one of the rare surviving houses during this event. I also read that Robert Newell nearly bankrupted himself, taking in refugees from the flood. Like, he was putting so many resources into it, trying to help people out, that almost lost all his money. Anywho, today we'll hear about the prehistoric monuments, meet the largest landowner of Western Oregon during the 1800s, learn a factoid about the world's longest graveyard, hear about the Pony Express business failure, analyze a family history that goes back to the 1500s, hear a heartbreaking family story of loss during the Oregon Trail, and finally talk about the famous Nez Perce Indian wife, Kitty Sote Newell. So pretty big visit overall today. I'll do my best not to bore you and get to the people that we want to talk about, so hope you enjoy it. Here's a pretty arrival into Oregon and a pretty old birth here in 1798 of James Elliott Hall. They came to Oregon in 1845. However, him and his wife took the famous Meek Cutoff trail, I believe, an untested and untraveled trail where no wagons had ever traveled before. If you want a detailed story of that, watch my West Union Baptist Cemetery video. That goes into great detail about that disaster of a trip. But also found a cool link to an old journal from 1845 to give you an idea. August 28th, 1845, begin quote, "The road today has been very broken and rough today. Had some rain tonight. Traveled up to a hollow over some very large hills. Some oxen gave out today," end quote. So it gives you an idea of how that trip went. But it appears James and his wife Cynthia ran a hotel at some time in Butteville, Oregon. Our next story is about Zimmer Mendenhall. Unsure when Zimmer came to Oregon. My guess is a bit late, but I did see there was something around 1876 in the records as coming to Oregon. And it's relatively unknown if he's truly buried here. He died sometime in 1905 in Oregon, and it's speculated that he's buried here because his son in front of us, I believe, is buried in this cemetery. However, like always, I like to see how far back I can click back in family history, see if I can find anything interesting, and I sure did with this one. Turns out Zimri's great times ex-grandfather, I don't know how many times you have to go back, goes back to a John Mildenhall, spelled differently, who was born in 1560 in Wiltshire, England, which is home to the monument Stonehenge. Strangely enough, John Mildenhall is buried in India. Well, that's because he left England in 1599, traveling through Persia into India. He would reach it in 1603 and apparently spoke with Emperor Akbar, who was the third emperor of the Mughal Empire. During Akbar's reign, the empire tripled in size and wealth, so he must have done a good job. I did read he had 7 wives listed in a note that said several others. Sounds like a lot of work. Anyways, John would come visit India again in 1614, but unfortunately fell ill, dying there. Here's a pic of his final resting plate from Find a Grave, kind of a cool headstone. This would be Jacques, John Mathiot, I think that's how you say all that. Born in Auxontax Road, France. As of 2015, the town has a whopping population of 546 people. Anyways, John would come solo to the USA in 1839. He was married at the time and did have children, but they came to the US later. Looks like they settled in Ohio. In 1853, they came to Oregon and got into the grape making business, so pretty early arrival here. Alright, we're at the headstone of the Abernathys, more specifically Oliver we're interested in here. Born in 1832 in Missouri and a pretty sad upbringing. Records show that he had to move to Tennessee at one point to live with his grandparents when he was young because his mother died tragically. She was only 24 when she died, and the story goes that Oliver's father, Clayton Dixon Abernathy, had a complete lack of being after she died. He died in 1850 at the age of 59. Oliver and his wife are pioneers of 1853, as you see on their headstone. However, tragedy would strike Oliver's family again as his brother, Starling G. Abernathy, would serve in the Civil War, 19th Regiment of Tennessee Infantry, Confederate Army to be exact. Starling was a first lieutenant and met his end at the Battle of Stones River. He is buried at Ball Camp Baptist Cemetery in Tennessee, so if we have any Tennessee viewers out there, hit up that cemetery for us. This battle was a bit brutal as it had the highest percentage of casualties on both the Union and Confederate side. Casualties and losses included 13,900 for the Union and around 11,700 for the Confederate side. This would also be the famous Battle of the Bands, the night before the battle of the two armies would face each other. They were within like 700 yards, I believe. So the Union side would play songs such as Hail Columbia, an American patriotic song, while the Confederate Army played Dixie. Finally, both bands started playing Home Sweet Home together, with thousands of Union and Confederate soldiers singing together before engaging in one of the more brutal battles of the Civil War. So pretty epic story there, the Battle of the Bands. Pretty epic monument here for John Hofer, born in Germany in 1825 and came to America in 1844. He is an 1850 arrival in Oregon, but would leave for Wisconsin for some reason in 1859, where he'd meet his wife there, who was originally from Germany as well. They would move to Oregon, and John apparently owned the largest amount of land in the Willamette Valley. For the out-of-staters, to give you an idea, I found this nifty map here. Section in green is the valley, so for being such a kind of a highly populated area during that time where all the pioneers were coming in, scored quite a bit of land back then. The article I read made it sound like he was pretty instrumental in developing Marion County as well. Here's John Zorn's headstone, born in Hesse, Germany in 1802. Hesse is also located near a prehistoric burial monument, one of the most important megalithic monuments in Central Europe, which I guess was like accidentally discovered in 1894. I tried to put a picture in a vid, but this thing goes back to like 4000 BC, so too bad we can't do a little cemetery visit there, huh? Anyways, unsure when John came to the USA, but I did see one of his children, Adam Zorn, is shown as immigrating to New York in 1852. However, we're interested in his son, Casper Zorn, so let's go find his headstone. But John kind of has that old school look to his headstone. I really like it, and there's a pretty sad epitaph on this headstone. Hopefully we can see that during the tour, unless you guys can see it on the camera. And not too far away from John is Casper Zorn, born in 1828, also in Germany like his father. I get the feeling they arrived in the late 1850s. Maybe that's because John is shown as living in Marion County in 1860. But Casper, he was like the rich version of Donald Trump in the 1800s in this area. Had quite the bit of money. The largest landowner in Western Oregon and one of the wealthiest men in the Willamette Valley. Looks like he had a firm called Hofer and Zorn for like 50 years. So I'm guessing that's where the money rolled in. Casper never married for some reason, so when he died in 1910, his wealth was spread among his few relatives, so lucky for them. Alright, I think I found the right headstone of William Henry Thomas, but when you find it, it just simply says Mr. Thomas, 1888. He is an 1852 immigrant to Oregon. His find a grave profile led me to his wife and their experience along the Oregon Trail, and I think it's a perfect example of the loss and troubles during this risky journey. William's story begins in Montgomery, Ohio, when he was born in 1819. Unsure when he moved to Indiana, but that's when he met his wife, Elizabeth Jane Sweet. The last name of the spelling was a bit confusing because they spell it with like 2 T's in one thing and then 2 E's in the other, making it Sweet. So we'll just pronounce it Sweet. But she was born in Fort Wayne, Indiana in 1832. They would decide to travel Oregon Trail in 1852, and during this time they did have an infant. Sadly, that infant would die along the Oregon Trail at the age of 5 months in September of 1852. Elizabeth's father, Benjamin Sweet, and 2 of her siblings died along the trail as well. I read that this particular train of wagons was plagued by cholera, smallpox, and Native American attacks. Looks like their burial locations are unknown for the most part for her family members. Commonly you'll see on Find a Grave for specifics, it's unknown, or it'll say buried along the Oregon Trail somewhere out there. We'll most likely never know. We're still at Mr. Thompson's headstone, but continuing on, apparently like 2/3 of the crew were depleted by the time they arrived in Oregon, so there was a serious decline in numbers with the crew. 1852 was the year known for many deaths due to diseases to not only humans but to animals. We talked about the mythological disease hollow horn at South Yamhill Cemetery with oxen, so if you're interested in that whole process, watch that video. It's a little disturbing what they did back then. There's also a few diaries available during this year, and one from a woman described seeing over 400 graves along the Oregon Trail. And not a lot of people know this, and I didn't know this till last week in reading. Oregon Trail is sometimes called the world's longest graveyard. I read one stat that said every 80 yards there'd often be a grave, and sometimes even more in that plot. Sadly, grave robbers took advantage of this and raided them. On a positive note, one of Elizabeth's brothers, Cornelius Sweet Sr., owned a saloon in California and dealt cigars, wines, and liquors. Alrighty, got a little quiet all of a sudden, eerily quiet. Now, I did read that if you come to the cemetery you get kind of an odd, eerie feeling, but I haven't had any of that so far. It's been kind of pleasant so far. For our next story here of Kitty Sote Newell. Now, if you watch my West Union Baptist Cemetery video, you'll recognize that unique name, Casoto or Casote. I wasn't really sure how you properly pronounce it, but we did meet her sister, Fanny Williams Casote Abert, at West Union. Both girls are Native Americans coming from the Nez Perce tribe, and Kitty was born in 1822 in Idaho, and I'm guessing that's where the Nez Perce lived during those days, and maybe there's still a reservation there. I'm not really sure. I meant to look into that. And we talked about West Union. Her father's name was Thunder Eyes, who was a shaman for the tribe. Kitty's mother's name was Feather Earrings. But Kitty would marry a fur trapper named Robert Doc Newell in 1834, and if you paid attention to her birth year, you heard that right. She married at 12 years old. Robert would be around 26 during that time, so different time, different place. Kitty's true Native American name isn't apparently known, but I guess Robert called her simply Kitty. Relationships with the Nez Perce were important back then, and Kitty was of high value. She could assist Robert with raising children, cooking, basically all the stuff we hate adulting at home. And we've discussed that white women were in high demand back then in Oregon. There wasn't a lot of women here for some reason. So this is why Native American women were often married young to fur trappers in the early days. And with more and more white settlers moving in, unfortunately, this meant new diseases arrived in Oregon as well. Unfortunately, Kitty would fall victim to the diseases introduced into the area. She was only around 25 when she died. Short life, rough upbringing, I'm guessing, and kind of unfair. Her ashes would be spread along Champoeg Creek. I don't believe she's buried here, because when you go and find a grave, you see a headstone, but when you click on it, it takes you to the Champoeg State Park, and I believe her ashes are spread up there. And there's actually a memorial up there as well, but it looked kind of busy this morning at that state park, so I don't think we'll go to it. But yeah, that's her story. And I believe Robert would marry in 1846, only a year after Kitty's death, so quick movement there. Hopefully you guys can see the headstone. I'll show it during the tour as always. Sun's not agreeing with my camera today, but this will be the headstone of Thomas and Sarah Collison. Thomas is a pioneer of 1861, a little late for our taste, but it's still part of Oregon history because coincidentally this is around the time of the short-lived Pony Express mail service. Basically it was a relay of horseback riders which would travel between Missouri and California. They would keep the east in touch with the west and vice versa. Hopefully the map shows up in the video, but this gives you an idea of the route. The riders had to travel light. It was all about mail. And the riders were allowed one revolver and a water sack. Messages could be sent within 10 days apparently, so this was a pretty big deal back then. Sadly, the Pony Express was short-lived, going bankrupt in just 18 months with the creation of the Transcontinental Telegraph. But did find a cool tidbit of information that Buffalo Bill Cody signed with the Pony Express when he was just 15 years old. On one occasion, he accidentally ran into an Indian war party, and you can imagine that didn't go very well, but luckily he escaped with his life. And our last stop is probably the individual with the toughest path in the 1800s. And that would be Marion Mitchell Addy, who was born in Kentucky in 1823. She did marry Phineas R. Hunt in 1841 and came to Oregon with him and her first son in 1845. They would settle in Marion County, more specifically Hubbard, Oregon. In 1849, her husband Phineas would head out to California for the gold rush, happening event then. He apparently died there with no burial specifics or location listed, sadly. I believe she had a second child with Phineas and a Prudence, but a third child died during infancy. Mary moves fast, if the information is accurate. She married Robert Addy in 1849, the same year Phineas died and disappeared. In 1880, Robert went missing, was declared dead in 1888. No ideas on his whereabouts either, so she didn't have good luck with the husbands there. She did have children with Robert, though. The first is listed as possibly dying in South America. No idea where she is as well, or location. And sadly, one of her sons named Henry Clay Hunt served in the Civil War and died at the poorhouse in 1890. And allegedly, Mary gave birth to 2 stillborn twins, and unsure if that's true or not based on the write-up, and no idea where they're buried. So Mary had a tough outing there. I feel kind of bad. Alright, time for the tour. Coming in is pretty easy. Probably the whole place to yourself, most likely. Just the birds and the chipmunks. Pretty quiet one overall. Out in the country, not a whole lot happening. Didn't see a whole lot of vandalism or anything like that. Maybe like 2 or 3 headstones. One was missing, one was kind of busted in half. But overall, pretty well taken care of. But definitely a little hidden one. I mean, once in a while you see this. Not sure if they just fell over or what. But a really fun one, loaded with a lot of history if you look into it. That one got busted, but find Mendenhall right here. Talked about Zimmer, I think that's how you said his name. And his family going back to the 1500s or something like that, and it was great times, whatever. Ancestors meeting the emperor, so it was kind of neat. I was thinking about going up to that state park to find Kitty's memorial, but I drove past this morning and there was like a bunch of cars there, so I think it's I'm not sure if you have to pay to get in or if it's free to visit or if it's like a walking trail, but it looked very busy this morning. We talked about Jean of France, Cool story. It has a weeping willow tree on this headstone. And that's in French. I can't read that, but I'll leave that for you guys who... Looks like a Bible verse. Probably people that took French in high school. I took, what, a couple years of Spanish, and I still suck at it. Here's a hall in the back. Looks like they died young. But, you know, like I said, overall quiet one. You'll have the whole place to yourself, most likely. Not a forgotten one. Well taken care of. But just a fun visit. Very quiet. Don't think we've seen this before. Looks like something burrowing under that one, huh? All he knows was under there, but we've never seen this. It's like a big, gigantic rectangle. Very religious individuals, I'm guessing. Seen some Bible verses, and but this one was neat. I will make music for, or make music to the Lord. A big piano on there. I think the pioneers, for the most part, are buried up front. Newer ones towards the back. I mean, it's kind of cliche. We've seen that before. So it'll be easy to find the older individuals if you're interested in history. And they said I think the description was the Jurgen church used to sit in the parking lot there. So right in front of us was potentially the location of the Jurgensville, I think is how you say it. Church. Who's this? I did wonder who this was. Kennedy. Jesus, is it the real Kennedys? Look at the size of that headstone. Squeeze past here. Collison, talked about them. I believe I promised you I'd stop at their headstone since the sun is bright today. Pretty cool with the hearts though. I don't think we've talked about one Civil War vet, and I don't know if there's any buried here. I don't think I came across one, shockingly. But this was a cool headstone of a countryman. I've seen that last name once in another cemetery, but I haven't found any stuff on them. Kind of a good mix here, German, French. Like I said, heavy on the religious sayings and Bible verses on the headstone. There's Abernathy, talked about them. There is a headstone coming up. If there's any symbolism people out there, maybe you could help me, because I feel like I should know what it means, but it's like slipping my mind right now. Here's a Masonic, but that's not it. We easily identify that. And there's John Hofer. Talk about him. And Casper Zorn. And I promised you I'd stop by his headstone as well to show you the epitaph. But kind of a sad one. Old school. I like his headstone the most. And there's Casper. It was apparently loaded with money. So his relatives got well paid during his death. This headstone was one of the more unique ones in the cemetery. Augusta Wenger. Which brings me to George Wenger, and I feel like I should know what this means, but there's FHC, and it looks like a crescent moon is in there. I looked up on my cell phone real quick and I was not successful in what that meaning is. I did find something called the encampment, and I'm not familiar with that at all. But that was like it. And then when I looked it up, literally nothing came up. So if one of you know more about that out there, if you're willing to share with us in the comments, feel free, because your guess is as good as mine. That was a native Lee. Check that out. Ashes at sea, and just ashes of. Guessing they went to the coast for that one. That's cool. This one had like a lot of little cool little things there. Statues. A big fat cat. I'm guessing this has some meaning. A little girl looking at a headstone with a squirrel reading its book. Check out this little guy. These headstones are kind of fun over here with the lantern. That's the fun part about cemetery exploration. You see these potentially little hidden messages and stories in them. I mean, what do the statues represent? Why is a little girl staring at the stone? Why does the dog have a lamp? Did they have a dog? He hold the light for you when you went to the bathroom at the outhouse. I don't know. Like, just wondering. All these weird stories out there. Interesting ones. I think Frederick was a pilot. Another Bible verse written over there. That's a cool little one over here. World War II. Apologies, the sun it's cooking me, man, here. So that's a child. Oh man, like 1 year old. It was a very, very festive one over here. It kind of reminded me of California or Florida. We'll go check it out. Let's go see who the popular one is here with the palm tree in their their little plot and flowers. Oh wow! Didn't even notice this earlier. It's got like a little glass window with the lock case. I cannot read anything on there. It's like it was cleaned with something, or I don't know. But got their own palm tree. It's kind of neat. See if we can discover anything over here. There's a child in there. I can't read it because of the bush, but you can see the little lamb. We've learned that. Very angry chipmunk back there, squawking at me. Water pump there. It's kind of neat, huh? I always enjoy that, the older ones. It even still has a manufacturer on there. There's a memorial in the center. Jurgen, I wonder if her ancestors are part of that church. We saw that alternative name over and over. But kind of got this cool medieval cross here. I like that one. Anywho, I think that's it for Champoeg Cemetery. I hope you enjoyed the visit. Quite a bit of history with this one. If you have any other recommendations for cemeteries to visit in Oregon or either in southern Washington, feel free to pipe up below. Hope you're doing all right, and stay safe out there. Thanks for watching.